This man has a pulse. If you pull me away now, he will die. Do you understand that? Turn around. Put your hands behind your back, now. Hey, wait, you're stopping here. Keep moving. Damn it, he's crashing. Against the rig, hands back. You're making a mistake.
The call cracked through the ambulance's radio at 10:17 a.m., a burst of static and urgency that sliced through the morning calm. Unit 12, respond code 3. Male, mid-50s, reported cardiac arrest. Construction site, corner of 4th and Elm. Liam O'Connell acknowledged the dispatch, his voice a steady baritone that betrayed none of the adrenaline now coursing through his veins. He glanced at his partner, Grace Carter, who already had the siren screaming and was expertly maneuvering the heavy vehicle into the downtown traffic. Cars parted before them like a metallic sea. Liam had been a paramedic for 15 years, the last 5 with the Denver Health Paramedic Division. Before that, he'd served 2 tours in Iraq as a combat medic with the 10th Mountain Division. He'd seen the fragility of human life in ways most people only witnessed in movies. He knew the value of the golden hour, that critical window after a trauma or medical event where prompt intervention could mean the difference between life and death. This call had all the hallmarks of a race against that unforgiving clock. They arrived on scene in under 6 minutes. The construction site was a controlled chaos of half-finished steel beams and concrete dust. A small crowd of workers in hard hats and high-visibility vests were clustered around a man lying motionless on the ground. Liam grabbed the jump bag and the cardiac monitor and was out of the ambulance before Grace had even killed the engine. "Everybody back! Give us room to work!" Liam's voice was pure command, a product of years spent managing chaotic scenes. The workers complied instantly, their anxious faces turning to him with a mixture of fear and hope. The man on the ground was pale, his skin clammy and tinged with a frightening shade of blue. Liam's trained eyes took it all in. Cyanosis, agonal breathing, no obvious signs of trauma. Classic cardiac event. He dropped to his knees, his fingers immediately finding the man's carotid artery. Nothing. "Starting compressions," he announced to Grace, who was now at his side, setting up the defibrillator and airway equipment. Liam's hands locked together over the man's sternum, and he began the rhythmic, life-sustaining pumps. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. His movements were precise, powerful, a well-oiled machine honed by thousands of hours of training and real-world application. He was in his element, a place where instinct and procedure merged into a single purpose, to pull a life back from the brink. "Pads are on," Grace said, her voice calm and focused. "Analyzing rhythm. Everybody clear." Liam pulled his hands back. The machine whirred for a moment before a synthesized voice declared, "Shock advised." "Charging. I'm clear. You're clear. Everybody's clear," Grace chanted, her hand hovering over the orange button. She pressed it. The man's body arched violently off the ground for a split second, then fell limp. "Resume compressions," Grace ordered, and Liam was back on the chest without missing a beat. This was their dance, a grim but perfectly synchronized ballet performed on the edge of life and death. They worked seamlessly, a team that communicated with little more than glances and single words. They established an IV line, pushed a first round of epinephrine, and prepared to intubate. The patient's life was hanging by the thinnest of threads, and every second Liam and Grace bought was a victory. It was in this moment of intense, focused effort that a new shadow fell across the scene. The sound of heavy boots crunching on gravel announced an arrival that was about to turn a medical crisis into a legal catastrophe. Liam didn't look up. He couldn't. The only thing that mattered was the heart that wasn't beating beneath his hands. "What's going on here?" The voice was sharp, laced with an authority that expected immediate deference. Liam didn't pause his compressions. "Paramedic, man's in cardiac arrest. We need to keep the scene clear. I'm Officer Evan Riley, DPD. I need to secure the area and get a statement." Riley was in his late 30s with a trim, athletic build that seemed coiled with tension. He surveyed the scene not with the practiced eye of someone assessing a medical emergency, but with the suspicious gaze of an officer looking for a crime. His hand rested habitually on his duty belt. "You can do that in a minute, officer," Liam said, his breathing becoming labored from the exertion of CPR. "Right now we need to work. Grace, let's check rhythm again." They paused compressions once more. The monitor still showed a chaotic, non-viable rhythm. "No change. Continuing CPR. Push another round of epi," Liam instructed. Officer Riley stepped closer, his presence an unwelcome intrusion into their sterile field. "I need to see some identification from you, both of you, and I need to know what happened to this man before I let you move him." Liam glanced up for the first time, his frustration barely concealed. "Officer, my ID is in the truck. This man is clinically dead. We are actively trying to save his life. You are interfering with emergency medical treatment. Please step back." A flicker of annoyance crossed Riley's face. He was used to compliance. Paramedics, firefighters, civilians. When a cop gave an order, people were supposed to follow it. This paramedic's firm, dismissive tone struck a dissonant chord with his sense of control. "I'm not asking again. I'm conducting an investigation. Step away from the patient and show me your identification." The construction foreman, a burly man named Dave, stepped forward. "Officer, he's not lying. Marcus he just grabbed his chest and collapsed. These folks are trying to save him." Riley shot the foreman a glare that silenced him immediately. His focus returned to Liam. "Sir, your refusal to identify yourself is obstructing my investigation. That's a jailable offense." Liam felt a surge of disbelief, but he shoved it down, channeling everything into the task at hand. "My name is Liam O'Connell. My partner is Grace Carter. We are Denver Health paramedics. Our certifications are on display in the ambulance. You are welcome to go look. I am not stopping treatment on a dying man to show you a piece of plastic. Now please, step away." This was a direct challenge. In Riley's mind, the hierarchy was clear. Law enforcement was at the top. A medical situation didn't change that. He saw Liam's refusal not as a professional necessity, but as an act of defiance. It was a personal affront to his authority. "That's it," Riley said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "I've given you a lawful order and you have refused. You are creating a public safety issue." Grace, while trying to manage the patient's airway, looked at Riley with wide, incredulous eyes. "Officer, with all due respect, you are the public safety issue right now. We have a return of spontaneous circulation." A weak, thready pulse had flickered to life. It was the moment they had been fighting for. "We need to load and go, now!" Liam yelled. "Grace, get the stretcher. We're losing him again if we don't move." They had a heartbeat, but it was fragile. The hospital was his only chance. As Grace rushed to get the gurney, Liam and the foreman prepared to lift the patient. But before they could move him an inch, Officer Riley stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Liam's shoulder. "You're not going anywhere. You're under arrest." The words hung in the air, so absurd they barely registered. "Under arrest? For what?" Liam asked, his voice strained with disbelief as he continued to monitor the patient. "For saving a man's life?" "For obstruction of justice and failure to obey a lawful order," Riley stated, his grip on Liam's shoulder tightening. He was no longer just an officer on a scene. He was an enforcer of his own wounded pride. He began to pull Liam away from the patient. "Get your hands off me!" Liam's voice boomed across the construction site. It wasn't a plea, it was a command born of desperation. "This man has a pulse. If you pull me away now, he will die. Do you understand that? His death will be on you." The crowd of construction workers who had been watching in stunned silence began to murmur. Several of them had their phones out, the small red dots of recording lights blinking in the morning sun. They were capturing everything: the paramedic fighting for a life, the police officer pulling him away. Riley was beyond reason. He had drawn a line in the sand, and to back down now would be to admit he was wrong, an admission his ego would not allow. He saw Liam's resistance not as a plea to save a patient, but as a direct physical challenge. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Now!" Liam made a split-second decision. He twisted out of Riley's grasp and turned his attention back to the man on the ground, whose face was already starting to show signs of fading again. "Grace, Forget the stretcher for a second. Get the Lucas device on him. We need mechanical compressions if I can't do them. That was the final straw for Riley. He lunged forward, grabbing Liam's arm and wrenching it behind his back with a practiced, painful motion. Liam grunted in surprise and pain as his body was forced away from his patient. His medical bag tipped over, its contents, syringes, gauze, medication vials, spilling across the dusty ground. "I'm not resisting," Liam said through gritted teeth. "I'm a paramedic performing my duty." Riley ignored him. He spun Liam around and slammed him against the side of the ambulance. The metallic clang echoed through the site. With swift, efficient movements, he cuffed Liam's hands behind his back. The cold steel bit into Liam's wrists, a chilling symbol of a world turned upside down. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was unnaturally loud, a definitive, irreversible act captured by a half-dozen cell phone cameras. "My patient!" Liam yelled, his head turned toward the scene he was now powerless to control. "Grace, don't let him die!" Grace was frozen for a heartbeat, her face a mask of shock and horror. Then her training kicked in. She dropped to her knees beside the patient, taking over compressions herself, her movements frantic, less precise than Liam's had been. The foreman, Dave, knelt beside her, asking what he could do to help. The scene had descended into chaos. The fragile pulse they had worked so hard to get back was almost certainly gone. Officer Riley shoved Liam toward his patrol car, a grim satisfaction on his face. He had won the confrontation. He had asserted his authority. As he pushed the handcuffed paramedic into the back seat, he was oblivious to the fact that he hadn't just arrested a man, he had arrested a hero, and in doing so, had just signed the death warrant for his own career. The car door slammed shut, sealing Liam in a cage of plastic and steel, a helpless witness to the life he was no longer allowed to save. Inside the patrol car, the world shrank to the view through the wire mesh partition. Liam sat on the hard plastic bench, the handcuffs digging into his wrists with every slight movement. He watched as a second ambulance, a backup unit, screamed onto the scene, its lights flashing a frantic rhythm against the downtown buildings. Two more paramedics jumped out, rushing toward the small, desperate group still working on Marcus Thorne. Officer Riley got into the driver's seat, the leather of his uniform creaking as he settled in. He adjusted his rearview mirror, his eyes briefly meeting Liam's in the reflection. There was no remorse in his gaze, only a cold, professional detachment that was more infuriating than any overt anger. He started the car but didn't drive away immediately, instead speaking into his radio, his voice calm and official as he reported the arrest. "Suspect in custody for 18-8-104, obstructing a peace officer. Continuing to county." Liam leaned his head against the cool glass of the window, his heart pounding with a mixture of rage and profound helplessness. He watched as the new paramedic crew took over. They were good, he knew them both, but precious, irreplaceable minutes had been lost. He saw them load Marcus onto a gurney and into their ambulance. The doors slammed shut, and the vehicle pulled away, its siren wailing a mournful song as it disappeared into traffic. His patient was gone, and he was left behind in handcuffs, a prisoner of a man who valued his ego more than a human life. Finally, Riley put the car in drive. The silence inside the vehicle was immense, a heavy blanket broken only by the crackle of the police radio. "You just cost that man his life," Liam said, his voice quiet but shaking with controlled fury. "I hope you understand what you've done. That wasn't an investigation. That was a power trip." Riley's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes on the road. "You were given a lawful order. You chose not to comply. The consequences of that choice are on you, not me. You think your job is more important than anyone else's? When someone's heart has stopped, yes, my job is absolutely more important than you checking my ID," Liam shot back. "That's not arrogance, that's triage. It's the very foundation of emergency response, a concept you clearly know nothing about." Riley didn't respond. He had his narrative and he was sticking to it. The paramedic had been uncooperative, belligerent, and had obstructed his ability to secure a potential crime scene. In his report, he would be the calm professional, and Liam would be the out-of-control public servant who needed to be subdued. He was confident his badge and his word would be enough. He had no idea about the cell phone videos already being uploaded, the foreman's 911 call reporting an officer interfering with medical aid, or the storm that was about to break over his head. The drive to the Denver County Jail took 15 minutes. For Liam, it felt like an eternity. He ran through the events in his mind, not with regret, but with a chilling clarity. He hadn't been rude. He hadn't been aggressive. He had been focused. He had stated his duty, his priority, and the medical facts. He had done everything right, professionally and ethically. The wrongness of his situation was so absolute, so stark, that it felt surreal. He wasn't just a man who had been arrested, he was a principle that had been violated. And as the patrol car pulled into the sally port of the jail, he knew this was far from over. This was only the beginning. The sterile, fluorescent-lit environment of the booking area was a world away from the sun-drenched chaos of the construction site. Officer Riley led Liam, still in handcuffs, toward the intake desk. The moment they walked in, the usual low hum of the precinct changed. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. A paramedic in uniform being brought in for booking was not a common sight. A veteran sergeant with salt and pepper hair and a name tag that read Miller looked up from her computer, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Riley, what in God's name is this?" "Sergeant, this is Liam O'Connell, arrested for obstruction at a medical call on 4th and Elm," Riley announced, a little too loudly, as if daring anyone to question him. Sergeant Miller stood up, her eyes narrowing as she looked from Riley's rigid posture to Liam's dirt-stained uniform and cuffed hands. "You arrested a paramedic? On a cardiac arrest call?" She knew Liam, not personally, but by reputation. He was one of the best, a guy who handled the city's worst traumas with unshakable competence. "He refused to provide identification and interfered with my attempts to secure the scene," Riley recited, his tone defensive. "Secure the scene from what, Evan? The heart attack?" Miller's voice was laced with undisguised skepticism. She walked around her desk and lowered her voice, though it still carried an edge of command. "Are you telling me you pulled a working medic off a patient who was coding?" "The situation was chaotic. He was uncooperative," Riley stammered, his confidence wavering slightly under the scrutiny of a superior officer. Miller looked at Liam. "Is that what happened, O'Connell?" "I told the officer I would provide ID as soon as the patient was stabilized for transport," Liam said, his voice even. "He had a momentary return of pulse. We were about to load him when Officer Riley arrested me. He pulled me away from the patient." Miller's expression hardened. She looked back at Riley, and for a moment, it seemed she might void the arrest on the spot. But the wheels of bureaucracy were already turning. The report was being filed. Undoing it would be a messy affair. "All right, Riley, go write your report. I want it on my desk in an hour. Every single detail." As Riley walked away, Miller turned to the booking officer. "Process him, but be respectful. Get those cuffs off him as soon as he's in the holding cell. And somebody get me the shift commander on the phone. Now!" The booking process was a humiliating ordeal. Liam's fingerprints were taken, his photo snapped for a mugshot, and his personal belongings were cataloged. His wallet, containing the very paramedic certification and driver's license that had started the whole incident, was placed in a plastic bag labeled evidence. The irony was sickening. As he was led to a holding cell, whispers followed him. Cops who had shared scenes with him, who had relied on his medical expertise to save victims of car crashes and shootings, stared with a mixture of pity and disbelief. They knew something was deeply wrong. The heavy steel door of the holding cell clanged shut, the sound echoing the finality of what had just happened. Liam sat on the cold metal bench and put his head in his hands. He wasn't thinking about himself or his career. He was thinking about Marcus Thorne. Was he alive? Did he make it to the hospital? Or did he die on a gurney because a police officer with a fragile ego couldn't stand being told to wait? The question haunted the silence of the cell, a silence that wouldn't last for long. The city's institutional gears were already grinding, and the first person to call a lawyer wasn't Liam. It was his partner, Grace, who had just finished giving a frantic, tearful report to their supervisor. The union was already being notified. The battle had begun. Liam had been in the holding cell for less than 45 minutes when a guard unlocked the door. "O'Connell, your lawyer's here." He stood up, surprised by the speed of the response. He hadn't even had a chance to make his one phone call. As he was escorted to a small, private interview room, he saw a woman standing by the table, her briefcase already open. She was in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of confidence that seemed to suck all the uncertainty out of the room. "Mr. O'Connell, I'm Jessica Thorne. I'm the chief legal counsel for the paramedics union. Your partner Grace called your supervisor, who called me directly. I came as soon as I heard." She shook his hand firmly. "Let's get you out of here." Liam sat down, a wave of relief washing over him. He was no longer alone in this. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "It's my job," she said, pulling out a legal pad. "But I need you to be crystal clear with me. Walk me through everything, from the moment the call came in. Don't leave out a single detail, no matter how small you think it is." For the next 20 minutes, Liam recounted the entire incident with the precision of a trained medic charting a patient's condition. He detailed the patient's state, the treatments administered, the exact words exchanged with Officer Riley, the presence of witnesses, the cell phone cameras. He explained his refusal to stop treatment and his repeated attempts to de-escalate the situation while prioritizing his patient. Jessica Thorne listened intently, her pen flying across the page. She asked clarifying questions. "Did he ever state what crime he suspected had been committed? Did he read you your Miranda rights? At any point, did you physically touch him before he grabbed you?" The answer to all three was no. When Liam finished, she clicked her pen shut and looked him straight in the eye. "This is an open and shut case of unlawful arrest and gross interference with emergency medical services. Officer Riley didn't just make a mistake, he violated state law. Section 18-8-104 of the Colorado Revised Statutes is about obstructing a peace officer, but it requires that the officer be acting under the color of official authority lawfully. Demanding a paramedic abandon a dying patient is not a lawful order. He's the one who was breaking the law." "What happens now?" Liam asked. "Now I go have a conversation with the shift commander and the city attorney's office, who I guarantee have already been notified. I'm going to make it very clear that they have two options. They can release you immediately, drop all charges, and issue a formal apology. Or they can proceed with this farce, and by tomorrow morning, they'll be facing a federal civil rights lawsuit that will make national headlines and cost this city millions. Given that there are likely a dozen videos of the incident already on the internet, I suspect they'll choose wisely." She stood up, her demeanor all business. "They're also going to hear from the chief of surgery at Denver Health. I made a call on the way over here. The hospital is fully aware of what happened." She paused at the door. "Sit tight. I don't think you'll be in here much longer." True to her word, Jessica Thorne was a force of nature. She went straight to Sergeant Miller's desk and, in a voice that was calm but carried the weight of impending litigation, laid out the legal reality of the situation. She spoke of dereliction of duty, of civil liability, of the PR nightmare that was currently unfolding on social media. She informed them that the paramedics union would stand behind Liam with its full financial and legal resources. The city's lawyers folded quickly. Less than an hour after Jessica's arrival, the door to Liam's holding cell opened again. It was Sergeant Miller. "You're being released, Mr. O'Connell. Your personal effects are at the front desk. All charges are being dropped." There was an apology in her eyes that her words couldn't formally offer. "I'm sorry for what you went through today." As Liam was signing the paperwork for his release, Jessica Thorne returned, her expression grim. "I have an update on your patient," she said quietly, leading him away from the bustle of the booking desk. Liam's heart sank. "Don't tell me." "He's alive," she said quickly, and Liam felt a profound, bone-deep relief. "But it was incredibly close. I just got off the phone with Dr. Alistair Finch, the head of cardiothoracic surgery at Denver Health." They stepped into a quiet hallway. "What did he say?" Marcus Thorne, that's his name, coded again in the second ambulance. They barely got him back. When he arrived at the ER, he was in cardiogenic shock. The delay was critical. They got him into the cath lab, and it turns out he had a 100% blockage of his left anterior descending artery, the widowmaker. They were able to place a stent, but he suffered significant heart muscle damage because of the extended lack of oxygen. Jessica took a deep breath. Dr. Finch was furious. He said, and I quote, "The 7 to 10 minute delay between the initial return of circulation and his arrival at the hospital was the direct cause of the secondary cardiac arrest and the subsequent muscle death. Had Mr. O'Connell been allowed to transport immediately, the patient's prognosis would have been exponentially better. That police officer didn't just interfere, he actively participated in nearly killing my patient." The words hit Liam like a physical blow. He had known the delay was bad, but hearing the surgeon's clinical, damning assessment made it devastatingly real. He had snatched a man back from death, only to have him nearly thrown back over the edge by an officer's ego. The victory he'd felt in getting a pulse now felt hollow, tainted by what came after. Will he recover?" Liam asked, his voice thick with emotion. "He's in a medically induced coma in the CVICU. His condition is still critical. The next 48 hours will tell the tale," Jessica said gently. "But Liam, you need to understand this. What Dr. Finch said changes everything. This is no longer just about your unlawful arrest. The medical evidence now proves that Officer Riley's actions directly caused grievous bodily harm to a civilian. This moves from a simple civil rights violation into a much more serious realm." She put a hand on his arm. "The city thought they could make this go away by dropping the charges. They are sorely mistaken. We now have a named victim who suffered catastrophic, life-altering injuries because of their officer's conduct. The legal and financial exposure for the city just went up by a factor of 10. Liam leaned against the wall, the adrenaline from the day finally draining away, leaving him feeling exhausted and empty. The fight wasn't just about his name anymore. It was about Marcus Thorne, a man he had never met but for whom he had fought, first with his hands and now, it seemed, with the full force of the law. "What Dr. Finch did is also important," Jessica continued, her voice hardening with strategic purpose. "He documented his opinion in the patient's official medical chart. It's now a permanent, admissible piece of evidence. A board-certified surgeon stating in a legal document that a police officer's actions nearly caused a patient's death. That's the kind of evidence that wins lawsuits before they even get to a courtroom." The battle lines had been redrawn. Officer Riley hadn't just wrongfully arrested a paramedic, he had created a medical catastrophe, and a top surgeon had just signed the official testament to that fact. Walking out of the Denver County Jail and into the late afternoon sun was a disorienting experience. The world outside had kept moving, oblivious to the drama that had consumed Liam's last few hours. The sounds of traffic and the sight of people walking freely on the sidewalk felt both normal and completely alien. Grace was waiting for him by her personal car, her face etched with worry. She rushed forward and gave him a hug. "Liam, I am so sorry. I didn't know what to do. He wouldn't listen." "You did everything right, Grace," Liam said, his voice raspy. "You stayed with the patient. That's all that mattered. Thank you for calling it in so fast." His partner from the ambulance, Mike, was there too, leaning against the car with his arms crossed. He just nodded at Liam, a look of grim respect in his eyes. "We got your unit back to the station. The chief wants to see you first thing in the morning. He's on our side, 100%. Jessica Thorne walked out behind him, her briefcase in hand. "Liam, go home and get some rest. Don't talk to anyone from the media and don't post anything on social media. Let me handle everything from here on out. I'll call you in the morning to discuss our next steps." "Next steps?" Liam asked, confused. "I thought the charges were dropped." "The charges against you were dropped," Jessica corrected him gently. "That was just the city trying to put out the immediate fire. What they did to you was a violation of your constitutional rights. What their officers' actions did to Marcus Thorne was a catastrophic failure of public duty. This is far from over. Dropping the charges doesn't undo the damage. He understood. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. If an officer could do this to him, a uniformed paramedic on a recorded scene, and face no consequences beyond a dropped charge, he would do it again. And the next time, the patient might not be as lucky as Marcus Thorne had been. Grace drove him home in a heavy silence. When he walked through his front door, the quiet of his empty apartment felt both comforting and oppressive. He sank onto his couch, the events of the day playing on a loop in his mind. The patient's blue face, the feel of ribs flexing under his hands, the aggressive certainty in Officer Riley's eyes, the sharp, cold bite of the handcuffs. He was free, but he didn't feel free. He felt marked by the experience. His profession, a job he loved and believed in, had been treated as an inconvenience. His duty to save a life had been criminalized. He turned on the local news, and the top story was already breaking. A shaky cell phone video showed a police officer forcefully arresting a paramedic while other first responders frantically worked on a man on the ground. The reporter's voice was grave as she announced that the Denver Police Department had offered no comment, but sources confirmed the paramedic had been released without charge. The public battle had begun. His name and face were now tied to this incident. He was no longer just a paramedic. He was a symbol. He knew the department and the police union would try to paint him as an arrogant hothead who thought he was above the law. They would dig into his past, looking for any complaint, any minor infraction to tarnish his reputation. His temporary freedom was just a lull in the storm. The real fight, the one for his name, for his profession, and for Marcus Thorne, was just ahead. The next morning, Liam met with Jessica Thorne and the head of the paramedics union in a downtown law office. The atmosphere was serious. The story had exploded overnight. The video was everywhere, and the DPD's silence was being interpreted as guilt. "The city attorney's office called me an hour ago," Jessica began, opening a file on the polished conference table. "They're in full damage control mode. They offered a formal written apology to you and the paramedic division, and they've placed Officer Riley on administrative leave pending an internal investigation." The union president, a veteran paramedic named Frank, scoffed. "Paid vacation. That's not a punishment, it's standard procedure. They're hoping we'll take the apology and let this fade away." "They also hinted at a potential financial settlement for you, Liam," Jessica added, looking at him carefully. "They didn't mention a number, but they used phrases like, 'resolve this amicably,' and 'recognize the unfortunate nature of the misunderstanding.' They want to contain this." Liam shook his head before she even finished. "An apology doesn't help Marcus Thorne's damaged heart. It doesn't prevent this from happening to another paramedic next week. Putting Riley on leave is meaningless if he's back on the street in a month with nothing but a note in his file." Jessica smiled slightly. "That's what I was hoping you'd say. Frank and I agree. An apology isn't justice. This was a systemic failure, not just a misunderstanding. It was a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure and a violation of your 14th Amendment right to due process. More than that, it was a fundamental betrayal of the public trust." She slid a thick document across the table toward Liam. The cover page read, "Liam O'Connell, plaintiff, versus Officer Evan Riley and the City and County of Denver, defendants." "This is a draft of a federal civil rights lawsuit," she explained. "We are not just suing Officer Riley as an individual. We are suing the City of Denver for failing to properly train and supervise its officers, and for maintaining policies that allow for this kind of conduct to occur without consequence. We're alleging unlawful arrest, malicious prosecution, and interference with life-saving medical care." Liam looked at the document. Seeing his name on it made it feel incredibly real and daunting. What about Marcus Thorne? His family has been contacted and has retained their own counsel. They will be filing a separate but parallel lawsuit for the personal injury and damages he suffered. Their case will be focused on the medical outcome. Our case is focused on the violation of your civil rights and the broader issue of police interfering with first responders. The two cases will support each other. Their medical evidence strengthens our claim, and our evidence of Riley's misconduct strengthens theirs. Frank, the union president, leaned forward. Liam, the union is funding this 100%. You won't pay a dime. This is a fight for all of us. For years, we've heard stories of cops bullying medics on scene, demanding they violate HIPAA, trying to take custody of patients who aren't medically cleared. Your case is the one with undeniable video evidence and a catastrophic outcome. This is our chance to draw a line in the sand, legally and permanently. Liam picked up a pen and signed the retainer agreement without hesitation. Let's do it. The moment the lawsuit was electronically filed that afternoon, the story escalated from a local news item to a national headline. The city's quiet attempt to sweep the incident under the rug had failed. By suing them in federal court, Liam and his team had taken the battle to a new arena, one where the city's actions would be scrutinized under the harsh light of constitutional law. They had refused the easy peace offering and chosen all-out war. The legal process known as discovery began, and it was here that the city's defense started to crumble. Discovery is where both sides are forced to turn over all relevant evidence, and the most crucial piece of evidence was Officer Evan Riley's body camera footage. The city's lawyers tried to delay its release, claiming it was part of an ongoing internal investigation, but the federal judge was not swayed. He ordered it turned over immediately. Jessica Thorne and her team watched the footage in a darkened conference room. The video started with the jarring motion of Officer Riley getting out of his car. The audio was crystal clear. It captured the sounds of the scene before Riley even spoke. The frantic beeping of the cardiac monitor, Grace Carter's calm voice calling out medical instructions, and Liam's steady rhythm of CPR compressions. The footage was even more damning than the bystander videos. It showed Riley's perspective, and through his eyes, the viewer saw a scene of controlled, professional medical intervention. There was no chaos, no public threat, no indication of a crime. There was only a medical team trying to save a life. Then, the audio captured every word of the exchange. It recorded Liam's patient, professional tone as he tried to explain the situation. "Officer, my ID is in the truck. This man is clinically dead. We are actively trying to save his life. Please step back." It was a plea for reason, not an act of defiance. The camera then recorded Riley's escalating aggression. His voice grew sharper, his demands more insistent. It showed him ignoring the foreman's attempt to corroborate Liam's story. Most critically, it captured the exact moment Grace announced, "We have a return of spontaneous circulation," and Liam's urgent cry, "We need to load and go, now!" Any reasonable person, let alone a trained public safety officer, would recognize that as the single most critical moment in the entire event. It was the moment the patient's life was back in the balance. Instead, the body camera showed Riley stepping forward, placing his hand on Liam and initiating the arrest. The camera shook violently as he wrenched Liam's arm behind his back, the audio filled with Liam's grunt of pain and the clatter of the medical kit. But the most powerful part of the video was the 7 minutes that followed the arrest. With Liam handcuffed in the back of the patrol car, Riley's camera continued to record. It showed him standing around, securing a scene where there was no crime, taking notes, while in the background, Grace and the newly arrived paramedics struggled to restabilize the patient. The camera became an unblinking eye, documenting a police officer doing pointless paperwork while a man's life hung in the balance just feet away. When the video ended, the conference room was silent. "His report says you were agitated and aggressive," Jessica said, her voice dripping with contempt. "It claims you took a bladed stance, as if preparing for a physical confrontation. It's a complete work of fiction. This video doesn't just contradict his report, it proves he deliberately falsified a legal document." She pointed to the screen. "This is our case, right here. This isn't just a video of a bad arrest, it's a real-time recording of one man's catastrophic failure to perform his duty and another man's heroic attempt to perform his. Any jury in America will see exactly what happened. The city knows it too. The body camera, a tool intended to protect officers from false claims, had become the chief witness for the prosecution against Officer Riley. It told the objective truth, and that truth was devastating. The next stage was depositions, sworn testimony given under oath outside of court. Officer Evan Riley's deposition was scheduled at a neutral law firm. He arrived with a lawyer from the police union and the city's lead attorney, his expression a mask of defensive confidence. He still believed he was the victim, a dedicated officer whose authority had been wrongly challenged. Jessica Thorne began the questioning calmly, her demeanor disarmingly pleasant. She started with his training. Officer Riley, in your police academy training, did you receive instruction on interacting with other first responders at an emergency scene? Yes, of course, Riley said confidently. And what did that training instruct you to do when you arrive at a scene where medical personnel are actively performing life-saving measures, like CPR? To secure the scene and ensure the safety of all personnel, he recited, as if from a textbook. Does securing the scene typically involve demanding identification from a paramedic who is in the middle of chest compressions? Jessica asked, her tone still neutral. The city's attorney shifted in his seat. Objection! Relevance! It's highly relevant, counsel. Overruled for purposes of deposition, Jessica said, never taking her eyes off Riley. You can answer the question, officer. I needed to verify who was on the scene, Riley insisted. I had no way of knowing if they were legitimate paramedics. Jessica paused, letting the absurdity of his statement hang in the air. They arrived in a fully marked Denver Health ambulance, were wearing uniforms, and were using several $100,000 worth of medical equipment. Did any of that suggest to you that they might be legitimate paramedics? I have to follow procedure, Riley said, his jaw tightening. Jessica then moved to the body camera footage, which was set up on a large monitor. She played the clip where Liam calmly explained the situation. Officer, in that clip, did Paramedic O'Connell seem aggressive to you? His tone was uncooperative. He was dismissive of my authority. His tone or his words? Jessica pressed. He told you a man was dying, and he would comply once the patient was stable. Do you consider that an uncooperative statement? He refused a lawful order, Riley repeated, his mantra of self-defense. Jessica then played the crucial moment. She paused the video right after Grace yelled about getting a pulse back. Officer Riley, at this exact moment you were informed by a medical professional that the patient's heart had started beating again. In your expert opinion as a first responder, is that a positive or a negative development? It's positive, obviously. So why, in the second following that positive development, did you choose to physically engage Paramedic O'Connell and place him under arrest, preventing him from transporting that patient to a hospital? Riley was silent for a long moment. He was still being defiant. The situation needed to be brought under control. Jessica leaned forward, her voice losing its pleasantness and taking on a sharp prosecutorial edge. Brought under control? Or were you angry that a paramedic, in the middle of saving a man's life, didn't immediately bow to your authority? Isn't it true, officer, that you were more concerned with your own ego than with the life of the man on the ground? Objection, the union lawyer shouted. Argumentative! But the damage was done. For 6 hours, Jessica Thorne systematically dismantled Riley's story, using his own body camera footage and his own arrogant, self-serving answers to paint a picture of a man who was, at best, grossly incompetent, and, at worst, a dangerous liability who let his pride override his public duty. He never once admitted he might have made a mistake. He never showed an ounce of remorse. His deposition transcript was a monument to his own hubris. When they left the room that day, the city's lawyers knew they were not going to trial. A jury would crucify him, and the city along with him. The day after Riley's disastrous deposition, Jessica Thorne's phone rang. It was the lead attorney for the city of Denver. His tone was dramatically different from their previous interactions. The confidence was gone, replaced by a weary pragmatism. "Jessica, let's talk settlement," he said, dispensing with any preamble. "We want to resolve this." "I'm listening," Jessica replied, putting the call on speakerphone for Liam and Frank, the union president, to hear. "The city is prepared to offer Mr. O'Connell a settlement of $50,000 to compensate for his experience," the attorney said. "In return for a full release of all claims and a non-disclosure agreement, of course." There was a stunned silence in Jessica's office. Frank let out a short, incredulous laugh. $50,000? And an NDA? Is he joking? Liam felt a fresh surge of anger. They weren't trying to make it right, they were trying to buy his silence. They wanted to sweep their officer's life-threatening misconduct under the rug for the price of a mid-sized sedan. It was a profound insult, not just to him, but to Marcus Thorne and every paramedic who had ever been bullied on a scene. "Respectfully, David," Jessica said into the phone, her voice like ice, "your offer is not just inadequate, it's offensive. We will not be entertaining it. Perhaps you failed to understand the gravity of what happened here. Your officer didn't just have a bad day. He committed a constitutional violation that was recorded on his own camera, then lied about it in a sworn legal document. His actions resulted in a man suffering permanent heart damage. A $50,000 nuisance payment and a gag order will not make that go away." The city attorney sighed. "What are you looking for, then? Give me a number." "This isn't just about a number," Jessica countered. "While the financial compensation will need to be significantly higher, think 7 figures, that's only part of the equation. We are demanding institutional change. We want a complete overhaul of the DPD's protocols regarding interaction with EMS personnel. We want mandatory, scenario-based training for every officer in the department on EMS scene management and the legal precedents of medical care. And we want Officer Evan Riley terminated, not suspended, not retrained, fired." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You know we can't agree to personnel decisions as part of a civil settlement. That's a union and HR matter." "Then you'll have a very difficult time settling this case," Jessica said coolly. "We are scheduled for mediation next month. I suggest you come back to us with an offer that reflects the reality of your position, because if we have to take this to a jury, the number they write on the verdict form is going to be far higher than what we're discussing today. And the public outcry will ensure the policy changes and the termination happen anyway." She hung up the phone. Liam looked at her, a sense of grim determination settling over him. He had been prepared for a fight, but he hadn't realized the extent to which the city would try to minimize and dismiss what had happened. Their desperate lowball offer wasn't a sign of strength, it was a sign of profound weakness. They knew they were liable, and they were terrified of the public spectacle of a trial. That fear was Liam's and Jessica's greatest weapon. They had rejected the city's gambit, raising the stakes and making it clear that justice, not a quiet payoff, was their only goal. The mediation session took place a month later in the office of a retired federal judge. It was a final, mandatory attempt to settle the case before heading to trial. Liam was there in his dress uniform, a symbol of the profession that had been violated. Jessica Thorne was at his side, armed with volumes of evidence. The deposition transcripts, the bystander videos, the body cam footage, and a detailed report from a nationally recognized expert on police procedures who concluded Riley's actions were a catastrophic failure of training and judgment. The city's team came in looking defeated before the session even began. They had seen the same evidence. They knew the retired judge, a man known for his blunt assessments, would not be sympathetic to their position. The mediator listened to both sides present their cases. Jessica's presentation was a masterclass in controlled, factual demolition. She simply played 10 minutes of the body camera footage without commentary, letting Riley's own words and actions condemn him. She followed it with the sworn statement from Dr. Finch, the cardiac surgeon, detailing the medical consequences. When the city's attorney tried to argue that Riley was a good officer who made a split-second mistake in a chaotic environment, the mediator held up a hand. "Counsel, I've seen the video. The only chaos I saw was the chaos Officer Riley created himself. Let's not waste time pretending your client's actions were reasonable. They were indefensible. Now, let's talk about how you're going to make this right." The negotiations went on for 8 hours. The city's initial offer of $50,000 was a distant memory. They came back with $250,000, then $500,000. Jessica and Liam held firm. This was about more than money. Finally, a deal was struck. The city of Denver agreed to pay Liam O'Connell a settlement of $1.5 million. It was one of the largest settlements for a wrongful arrest of a first responder in the state's history. But the financial component was only the beginning. The true victory was in the non-economic terms of the settlement, which would be made public. The Denver Police Department agreed to a legally binding consent decree, overseen by the federal court, to implement sweeping reforms. These included 1. The First Responder Priority Protocol, a new department-wide policy explicitly stating that in a medical emergency, the authority of the on-scene lead paramedic or EMT regarding patient care supersedes the procedural requests of law enforcement. 2. Mandatory annual training. Every DPD officer, from rookie to chief, would be required to undergo annual training co-led by senior paramedics. This training would use Liam's body cam video as a case study in what not to do. 3. Automatic internal affairs review. Any complaint lodged by an EMS or fire department professional against a police officer for on-scene interference would trigger an automatic, high-priority investigation by internal affairs. It was a complete capitulation by the city. They had agreed to every single policy demand. While they couldn't formally agree to fire Riley as part of the settlement, their attorney quietly assured Jessica that the internal affairs investigation would be concluded appropriately within the next 30 days. When Liam walked out of the mediator's office, he felt a sense of profound, weary relief. The money was life-changing, but it felt secondary. The real win was the policy changes. His ordeal would now be enshrined in the DPD's rulebook, a permanent lesson born from one man's arrogance. Justice had been served, not just with a check, but with a promise of systemic change that would protect his brothers and sisters in uniform for years to come. 3 weeks after the settlement was announced, the Denver Police Department's Internal Affairs Division concluded its investigation into the conduct of Officer Evan Riley. The findings were released in a public statement by the Chief of Police, a rare move designed to show transparency and restore public trust. The IA report was scathing. It found that Officer Riley had violated multiple departmental policies, including neglect of duty, conduct unbecoming an officer, and falsification of an official report. The investigation confirmed that his decision to arrest Liam O'Connell was not based on a legitimate law enforcement purpose, but was an unwarranted escalation in response to a perceived challenge to his authority. It concluded that his actions directly interfered with the rendering of life-saving medical aid, placed a civilian's life in jeopardy, and brought discredit upon the Denver Police Department. The final sentence of the press release was unequivocal. Effective immediately, Evan Riley's employment with the Denver Police Department has been terminated. The news of his firing was the final public validation of everything Liam had said from the beginning. Riley hadn't been a hero maintaining order, he had been a liability who abused his power. His badge, which he had used as a shield for his arrogance, had been taken from him. His career in law enforcement was over. There would be no quiet resignation, no moving to another department in a different state. The national publicity of the case and the official damning findings of the IA investigation made him unemployable in the field. For Liam, the news brought a sense of closure. He felt no joy in another man's ruin, but he felt a profound sense of justice. The system, which Riley had tried to use as a weapon, had ultimately held him accountable. The termination sent a powerful message through the ranks of the DPD and beyond. The era of unchecked authority at emergency scenes was over. Riley's police union filed a grievance to protest the firing, as they were obligated to do, but it was a half-hearted effort. With the body cam footage, the multi-million-dollar settlement, and the chief's public condemnation, there was no ground to stand on. The termination was upheld. Evan Riley faded from public view, his name becoming a cautionary tale whispered in police academies and paramedic training halls. He was a living example of how a single ego-driven decision could unravel a career, destroy a reputation, and trigger a tidal wave of consequences. He had sowed the wind by arresting a hero, and he had reaped the whirlwind in the form of public disgrace and the loss of the very identity he had prized so highly. The power he had so carelessly wielded had, in the end, consumed him completely. His story was no longer his own. It was a lesson, a warning, and a footnote in the much larger story of the changes he had unwittingly set in motion. Liam O'Connell could have taken his settlement money and retired, disappearing into a quiet life far from the sirens and stresses of emergency medicine. But that was never his way. The ordeal had changed him, instilling in him a sense of responsibility that extended beyond the back of his ambulance. He used a significant portion of the settlement to establish the First Responders Legal Defense Fund, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing legal support for paramedics, EMTs, and firefighters who faced retaliation, discipline, or wrongful arrest for prioritizing patient care over improper demands from law enforcement. It was a resource he wished had existed for others before him. His story, amplified by the lawsuit and settlement, caught the attention of several state legislators. They invited him to testify before a committee at the Colorado State Capitol. Liam, wearing his dress uniform, stood before the lawmakers and told his story, not with anger, but with a powerful, measured plea for change. "Every day, first responders make life or death decisions in seconds," he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "We should not have to make those decisions while looking over our shoulder, wondering if a police officer who lacks medical training is going to arrest us for doing our job. We need the law to be our shield, not a sword to be used against us." He was followed by Marcus Thorne. The man who had been at the center of the storm had made a remarkable, though incomplete, recovery. He walked with a slight limp and spoke with a quiet rasp, his heart permanently weakened, but he was alive. He told the committee what he remembered: the crushing pain, the fading light, and then waking up in a hospital days later to learn that the paramedic who saved him had been handcuffed for refusing to stop. "He fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at Liam. "All I ask is that you pass a law that lets these good people do their fighting for the patients who need them, not against other people in uniform." The combined testimony was incredibly powerful. 6 months later, the Colorado legislature passed Senate Bill 2114, known colloquially as O'Connell's Law. The bill passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. It explicitly criminalized the act of intentionally interfering with on-duty emergency medical personnel who are providing life-saving care. It legally codified that a paramedic's decision regarding patient treatment and transport takes precedence over non-criminal law enforcement objectives on an emergency scene. The governor signed the bill into law in a public ceremony on the steps of the Capitol. Liam and Marcus stood on either side of him. The signing was more than a political act. It was the culmination of a painful journey, transforming a traumatic event into a lasting legacy of protection. The ripple effect was immediate. Legislators in Utah, Nevada, and Arizona began introducing similar bills, all citing the Denver incident as a catalyst. The body camera footage became a mandatory part of training curricula in police and paramedic programs across the country. Liam's story was no longer just his. It had become a transformative legal and educational movement, ensuring that the click of his handcuffs would echo for years as a reminder of the line that must never be crossed again. Years passed. Liam O'Connell never stopped being a paramedic. He continued to work his 24-hour shifts with the Denver Health Paramedic Division, responding to the daily symphony of human crisis that defined the city. He ran into cops on scenes all the time. Most were younger now, recruits who had learned about his case at the academy. They treated him with a quiet deference, an unspoken understanding of the battle he had fought for them all. The tension that had once existed at scenes between medics and police had eased, replaced by a clearer sense of roles and a respect for the new protocols. O'Connell's law was no longer a bill, it was just the way things were done. He still thought about that day, but the anger had long since faded, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. He knew his story had become a powerful teaching tool, a real-world example of authority clashing with duty. The settlement money had given him security, but the true reward was knowing that somewhere, a paramedic was standing firm, protecting a patient from improper interference, armed with the legal and institutional backing that he had helped forge. The First Responders Legal Defense Fund he had started had successfully defended dozens of first responders in smaller towns and rural counties, proving that the principles fought for in Denver could protect people everywhere. The legacy of the incident was not one of victory or defeat, but of clarification. It affirmed a simple, vital truth. The act of saving a life is a sacred duty that transcends bureaucratic lines and procedural demands. It is an act that must be protected, not obstructed. The echo of that day's siren never fully disappeared for Liam, but it no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like a promise. In the quiet moments after a difficult call, the question of why would sometimes surface. Why did Officer Evan Riley act the way he did? It was too simple to label him as merely a bad cop. The truth was likely more complex, rooted in a psychological cocktail of insecurity and a rigid, almost fanatical belief in a hierarchy where law enforcement stood at the apex. Perhaps his training had emphasized compliance above all else, failing to instill the critical thinking necessary to recognize when a different professional's expertise must take precedence. He may have seen Liam's calm, professional focus not as a sign of competence, but as a personal slight, an insubordinate refusal to acknowledge his authority. His ego, fragile and demanding, could not tolerate being relegated to a secondary role, even for a few critical moments. The tragedy of Evan Riley is that his desperate need to prove his power in that moment is precisely what caused him to lose it all. Could Liam have done anything differently to de-escalate the situation? It's a question he asked himself 1,000 times. Perhaps if he had immediately stopped, walked to the truck and presented his ID, the arrest could have been avoided. But that hypothetical scenario comes with a terrible unspoken cost. If he had done that, Marcus Thorne would have died. The patient's heart would have stopped for good during those abandoned moments. Liam's choice was never really a choice at all. He chose his patient's life over his own liberty, the only choice a true medic could make. His best defense, it turned out, was not in appeasing an irrational authority figure, but in performing his duty so flawlessly that the injustice of the interference became impossible to ignore. The system was supposed to protect him, and when it failed, his unwavering adherence to his oath became the catalyst to fix it. The ultimate lesson from that day on 4th and Elm is a profound one about the nature of power. True authority isn't demanded at the end of a badge. It's earned through competence, humility, and a deep understanding of responsibility. Liam's authority came from his skill to save a life. Riley's was a hollow shell, built only on the uniform he wore. When power is divorced from responsibility, it becomes tyranny, whether on a grand scale or in a small, dusty corner of a construction site. This story is a stark reminder that our greatest strength as a society lies not in blind obedience, but in empowering good people to do the right thing, especially when it's the hardest thing to do. What do you think is the most critical factor that leads to an abuse of power like this? And how can we better support first responders who find themselves in impossible situations? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.